A Libert Seguros agora é Yellow. Tudo aquilo que já era bom continua igual. Excelência e proximidade permanecem como nossa essência. Porque não é uma mudança, é uma evolução. A Yellow está sempre em sintonia com você. É liberdade com segurança. A melhor experiência acessível a todos os clientes, iluminando cada passo da sua jornada. Deixe essa luz iluminar seu caminho. Yellow Seguradora. Seguro para viver livre. Consulte seu corretor.
Hello everybody, welcome along to Somewhere on Earth. It's Tuesday the 5th of November 2024. And greetings from the Evergreen podcast community. Yes, as you know, we've just recently joined Evergreen. We're ever so excited about it, which is why we'd like to give you their details. You can check out their website. Most importantly, to go and find out other brilliant podcasts that you have on the Evergreen network. And just go to our website, Somewhere on Earth, and check out the Evergreen logo. And you can hear our companion podcasts, and they're well worth listening to. And coming up today, two topics on the menu in this edition, both in the continent of Africa. The authorities in Mozambique have imposed internet shutdowns amid protests following the recent presidential election. Campaigners say the outages are a human rights abuse. We'll discuss that. Meanwhile, across the continent, in Namibia, better access to services like health and education, even for those in some of the otherwise most neglected rural areas. That's the promise anyway, thanks to plans to roll out digital ID. That's all right here on the Somewhere on Earth podcast. Well, with us today for some experting is producer and editor Anya Literovich. Hello, Anya, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Gareth?
All good, thank you. Hanging on in there. So, here we go. Let's jump in with this then. Mozambique, as I mentioned right at the top there. There's been trouble in Mozambique. In fact, at least 11 people have been killed as police crack down on protests following elections in October. Authorities have shut down the mobile internet for the second time in less than a year. Well, I've just been speaking to Felicia Anthonio, who's the KeepItOn Campaign Manager at the digital rights organisation Access Now.
So this particular internet shutdown, it was targeting mobile internet connection in the country. And so fixed cable and Wi-Fi, for instance, would work. But then we all know that a lot of people rely on their mobile phones, and not many people can afford fixed cable for their homes or for their offices. And so shutting down mobile connectivity has serious implications for people as it cuts off a majority of the population from the internet. And yes, Access Now, we've documented 2 incidents. Aside authorities shutting down the mobile connectivity, they also targeted digital platforms in the country as the protests escalated in the country. And shutting down these platforms, it's a deliberate act to quell the protest and to also restrict people's access to information and to also prevent the outside world from monitoring and following closely what is going on in the country.
How extensive have these shutdowns been?
We've noted the disruptions across the country, so it's nationwide, and which means a lot of people have been impacted by these disruptions.
What do we know about the Mozambique's authorities' tendency to shut down the mobile internet? Have they done this before this year?
Unfortunately, this is the second time we are documenting a shutdown in Mozambique. The authorities did not issue any order, and so we don't know who ordered the shutdown in Mozambique as it stands. But then last year, we saw a similar disruption to the internet, which was a complete blackout for about 3 hours. And this was also around the local elections that were held in 2023 in October. And so seeing the authorities use this trend of imposing internet disruptions in times of elections is really, really worrying. And our monitoring sadly shows that once a country imposes a shutdown, they are more likely to do it. And this is what we are seeing in Mozambique as they impose their first internet disruption last year. in relation to elections, and then we're seeing them impose not just mobile internet, but then also disrupting access to digital platforms in order to quell the protests that are ongoing in the country.
What are the digital platforms affected? Are these social media sites mainly?
Yes, so the current shutdown mostly affected WhatsApp, but then other social media platforms were impacted, and we're still trying to gather more information about exactly what is being targeted.
So the shutdowns clearly, as you were saying, aimed to quash dissent and disseminating reactions and protest against the government, this long-sitting government that had been in power since 1975. What other effect do these shutdowns? What other effects do these shutdowns have on people's lives?
Clearly, we've seen a lot of crackdown on protests by governments imposing internet shutdowns, and in particularly with relation to election-related shutdowns, it's also becoming a common. Governments are increasingly targeting electoral processes with shutdowns, and our monitoring shows that election-related shutdowns prevent voters from accessing information or sharing essential information. They also decrease fairness, credibility, and transparency of elections. And they empower the incumbent regime to control the narrative throughout the electoral process. They also undermine the electorate's ability to make informed decisions, access polling resources, and fully shape their nation's future. Aside this, internet shutdowns also violate the fundamental rights of people's access to information, freedom of expression, and the right to assembly, as we are seeing in Mozambique. And the shutdown, as I indicated, is clearly to control, to exert control over the flow of information and to also call the protest. Increasingly, we're seeing how authorities have come to recognize how powerful the internet and digital platforms are in helping people to mobilize and organize during protests, hence the increased crackdown on these essential platforms. This year, not only aside from Mozambique, we've seen similar crackdown on protests by authorities using internet shutdowns in Bangladesh, in Kenya, as well as in Senegal. So this is a global concern for Access Now and the KeepItOn coalition. And then what's even more concerning is the fact that whenever the internet is shut down, journalists, human rights activists, and other stakeholders struggle to perform their watchdog role, thereby providing an avenue for perpetrators to cover up human rights abuses and evade accountability for these abuses.
Yeah, and of course there's economic harm, and I guess the government sees that as a price worth paying to quash dissent. So finally on this one then, what kind of economic damage would this do in the country?
A lot of people rely on the internet for their day-to-day activities, for their businesses, for education, for accessing healthcare information or services in the country. And so, aside the human rights implications, definitely it will have a direct impact on people that rely on digital platforms and the internet to promote their businesses or to make a living. And so this would have an impact on people's economic activities. For instance, we've seen in different parts of the world where, let's say, women rely on the internet to for their livelihood, like promoting small businesses and also engaging in activities that would in turn bring some revenue to their family or to enable them cater for their families. And so shutting down the internet has serious economic implications, not forgetting that the government or the nation also loses money. And then the companies that also are complicit in imposing these shutdowns will definitely lose money as well whenever the internet is shut down. And that is why we think the companies have a big role to play in pushing back against internet shutdowns and not just implementing them anytime they are approached by authorities, because they also have the responsibility to protect and mitigate all forms of harm against people that rely on their services to access the internet and stay online.
That's Felicia Anthonio of Access Now talking to us a little bit earlier. Anya, let's pick up on this with you then. And you're quite struck by the whole issue around economic costs, aren't you, around these shutdowns?
So the Internet Society, Gareth, have already calculated that the cost of this shutdown was over 1.2 million, in fact, almost $1.25 million US dollars. Now, that is obviously a huge cost. Mozambique is one of the poorest countries in the world, but obviously one that the authorities in Mozambique think is worth paying.
Indeed. And what kind of signals have we had that there has been this outage in Mozambique? And one of the reasons I asked that, Anya, is that you'd think outages are quite hard to report on because you're talking about the absence of something. Do you see what I mean? An absence of connectivity rather than the presence of it. So what kind of signatures are out there on the internet to help us know when these things are happening?
Well, tweets started to be published on the Friday after protests started on the Thursday that all three mobile phone companies had cut or reduced their services. That was on October the 25th. And this was also reported by NetBlocks, the Internet Observatory, not long after that. And these tweets were in English, in Portuguese and in French. So, we had different sources coming in through that. But then it was unclear as to who was behind them. But now we know.
So we heard a little bit of background behind the protests in our interview just now that we recorded. So what else can you tell us about the background to all this?
Well, the protests are against the re-election of the ruling Liberation Front Party, which is commonly known as Frelimo. And they unfortunately turned bloody and sadly deadly. 11 people so far have lost their lives in that. Now, the party has been in power for almost 5 decades, since 1975, and the country's electoral commission announced that Frelimo's Daniel Chapo had won 71% of the vote in this latest round of elections. Now, to put this into context of the population, Mozambique's population is incredibly young. The average age is under 18. And it's this younger generation that is turning against the current regime. Also, there are issues there with the cost of living crisis. There's been a surge in extreme poverty in the past decade. Just between December 2021 and 22, 1 million more people were living in extreme poverty, and this was mainly in urban areas like Maputo. Now, the government did reduce VAT, but that didn't have much impact on this cost of living crisis. So there certainly is a lot of anger out there as to the current situation and the current governing party.
All right, Anya, thanks for the background on that. And I'm just really pleased that we're able to talk about another election going on in the world. I know that there's an especially big election that's grabbing all the headlines, but sometimes it's easy to forget that democracy, or perhaps a lack of democracy from what we've been hearing, is going on in other countries. And I'm glad that we've been able to reflect that on this podcast. And we'd love your thoughts, dear listener. So if you want to get in touch, one way is via email, good old email. Yes, just get in touch with us on the email address, which is hello@somewhereonearth.co. hello@somewhereonearth.co. And one person who's done just that is Alex, who writes this. He says, "Hi, I'm Alex. I'm writing from Kenya. The volume levels for your edition on the 29th of October were horribly low. The excerpts from the interview about the Don't Break My Rice Bowl book, well, they were fine," says Alex, "but I had to listen on the woofer. Incidentally, a few of my neighbours heard all this and liked the podcast, and 2 have vowed to join this ever-growing movement, which is a win, I guess. So thanks, Alex. That's all right, isn't it, Anya? Starting with a valid complaint.
It is.
But then kind of
it is.
looking beyond that and saying, but we still love your podcast, and I've told some friends. So hint, hint, dear listener, we'd like you to do the same.
There is nothing bad that good won't come out of, was my dad's favourite Polish phrase. And I think this is one of those. Apologies for the low levels.
Oh, that's a good saying.
Well, I think partly it was because it was half term and I was rushing
I was going to say, what the heck?
But secondly, it is the new loading platform that we're using is different to the one before. And we are loading different file formats. We are experimenting. I have experimented a lot now, and I've written down what seemed to work last week on the remade version, and which we had messages saying, thank you, that's great, listening fine now. So hopefully if I repeat all of that, we'll be fine today.
All right. It's just one of those things that happens, as you say. We're changing platforms. There are changes going on. This is technical stuff, and yeah, remember, this is Anya doing it herself on her laptop, trying to make this as good as possible for everybody. So we're sorry, aren't we, Anya?
We are.
And as you say, we are checking it out. And of course, Anya, you took very quick action. Firstly, by replying to other listeners on our social media who'd noticed the sound level issue, and thanks to listeners, by the way, for pointing that out. And you were explaining what was going on, Anya, and then of course fixed it and then re-uploaded that edition. So I think the message is, if you have that edition and you just gave up listening to it because the sound levels weren't working for you, or you didn't have a spare woofer like Alex has to pick out the bass sounds, then that has been re-exported and re-uploaded. So do check it out, because we were really pleased with that episode. It's really strong stuff. We had a lovely interview with Patricia in there, and check it out.
And also please note that it can take up to 24 hours for other podcatchers to catch up. So I know that some people, for instance, only listen on a Wednesday evening because that's when it drops for them, even though we put it up on a Tuesday evening. So, and that also happens with the catch up. So I say, I've done it, and people go like, no, you haven't. No, I have. It hasn't gone through yet. So
I know. Well, my podcatcher was like that. I thought it was not been done, but then sure enough, I went back in a day later and it was fine. So, all right. Apologies for that, folks, but we are taking action. So, to Namibia now, from Mozambique to Namibia. And this is all about efforts to roll out verifiable ID so that more citizens can get online, so then they can get access to services and generally participate, so bridging the divide between the digital haves and the digital haven'ts. Namibia is, now for many in Namibia, they have to go all the way to the capital. I've driven across to get quite a chunk ID card. And without that, so I know then they struggle to get access to the likes of healthcare, education and banking services. In recent years, the UN Development Programme's been working with the government in Namibia on digital ID, and we can hear a little bit more now from journalist Abigail Ruth Opiah. She is a reporter with the Biometric Update news website. Abigail, welcome along to the podcast. Well, welcome along to the podcast. Good to have you along, Abigail. Can you just start by telling us about the state of online services in Namibia for citizens who might want to get access to things like healthcare and banking?
I think currently there is a big divide in terms of who can have access versus who can't, and who is able to get it at a quicker rate than others. So, for example, not just Namibia, but in other African countries as well, which I've covered Somalia, I've covered a bunch of others. You can see where, if it's a rural part of the country, then women are typically, pushed to the side in terms of they might not have access to just something as simple as a smartphone, which will be able to enable you to register these digital IDs that are being rolled out. And companies like Visa are, trying to work hard to, change that, but obviously it's a slow process. But it's one that is put on the forefront based on digital public infrastructure, DPI. So I've covered a lot of that, and it mainly focuses on inclusion. It's hard to have, large population, and not everybody is able to get something as simple as a digital ID. So I think in general there is progress. There are companies, big companies actually, that are on board to change what's happening currently, but it definitely isn't as developed as most of the developed countries.
So this is denying many people services because they can't get the smartphones, or even if they can, they don't have the connectivity. And can you just paint a picture of what life is like for somebody, maybe in a rural village, maybe many kilometres away from the capital, what life is like for them if they can't get any kind of digital or non-digital validation?
I think from the stuff I've covered recently, what I'm seeing more and more of is just the struggle for basic necessities, the struggle for things like if you want to, top up your phone and call a family member because you have an emergency, or if you wanted to get access to healthcare, if you wanted to do something as simple as voting, there is so much that is on the line and they can't actually access that. So it's your basic human right if you're a part of the country to be able to vote, but you can't because you don't have any kind of digital presence. So yeah, that is what it's like in a nutshell.
So what is going on then? How is the government of Namibia working with the UNDP and other partners? What are they doing to try and get around all this?
So with digital identification verification, it stems from, just using things like biometrics to be able to use fingerprints to be able to capture everybody, to make sure that everybody is noted down somewhere. So once you use your biometric fingerprint, if you don't have a phone, that's fine because you have a finger, so you can use your fingerprint. And that way, everybody's accounted for, everybody's will be able to be on the system, and therefore they can roll out things like digital ID through other means if connectivity isn't one that's able to be accessible to them.
So would this mean, for instance, if somebody wants to go and vote, they can just use their fingerprint on a voting machine or something, or even if they need to, I don't know, go to the local health centre and prove who they are so the doctors can access their records and give them treatment? Again, would that be something like fingerprint ID that might be the gateway, as it were, to these kinds of services?
Exactly that. So in Nigeria, they rolled out their first use of biometric fingerprint for the votes that they had last year. And whether it was completely successful, I'm not 100% sure because I didn't report the aftermath of what happened. But the sentiment was there. The fact that they were able to use biometrics from the national identity numbers that they've done, everybody has to put their fingerprint down, and then they're able to roll out that way. The start of something great is there. So currently, yes, I think in Namibia, same sentiment applies.
And they've already had a pilot, haven't they, in this deprived community of Groot Obe, which is just outside Windhoek, the capital. They've been running an accelerator lab, I gather. So there's quite a lot going on, accelerator labs and pilot projects and so on so far.
Yes, I think in general, as well as the accelerator labs, we've got companies that are also going in to emerging markets trying to create things like launch data centers, which is the hub of everything. If you look at it in a nutshell, it's going to house everything. So the closer you are with the closer the data center is, to where the data needs to be held, the better it is for it to have, low latency. You'll be able to have connectivity better, and then you'll be able to have things like fiber towers. We'll be able to have dark fiber. We'll be able to have subsea cables that are running through and through, and yeah, it's all building to one big picture.
Oh, I see. So when you talk about improvements overall in Namibia's access to the internet as an entire country, you mean all of this sets Namibia up well? And well, obviously, if they do this well, if it goes properly, it sets Namibia up and its citizens for the kind of benefits, the wider benefits of global connectivity.
100%. Digital transformation is not leaving any country behind. And I think once Namibia gets a hold of, I think it starts with digital ID, but then it boosts to other things. So you might not be able to give, a woman in the household a phone for now, but once she's registered with her, verification number, she'll be able to have access and do more things with herself.
Yeah, you can get a SIM and all those other really important things. So, Anya, listening to this, what do you make of all this? Because, we report quite a lot on Somewhere on Earth about digital ID documents and all those other kinds of things. So it's quite a global story as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's quite surprising at which countries perhaps aren't as advanced as you think they would be. Now, a new type of digital ID based on US passports in Google Wallet is just in beta testing at the moment. Users can scan the chip on their electronic passport, match their selfie biometrics with a short video. I know that quite a lot of banks are doing this as well. When I was setting up all the banking for Somewhere on Earth, everywhere I was doing it. I had to do the selfie. I had to have pictures of all my documents uploaded, and there's no way, you just can't get past that at all. Obviously, I had some issues, changes in hair color, maybe. Again, being a woman, the system isn't as good as it would be for a white man. But we got there eventually. Now, the thing is with these types of systems, like for Google Wallet, is you need near field communication, NFC, and your phone has to have that. Now, phones even 3 or 4 years ago it wasn't standard. It is pretty much now in new phones, but that is an issue as well, I think, that needs to be addressed in places where perhaps the technology isn't as new as say, in the developed world. Now, globally, you've got the International Civil Aviation Organization is looking to include passports, travel documents, because obviously across the EU, for instance, you can just travel on your ID, your country's, your national ID. And so that all needs to be inputted, near-field communication technology there again. But their services are now available in over 190 countries across Europe, Asia, Africa, North America, South America. It's becoming much more popular, and it's also quite interesting to see that some countries are lacking behind, including the UK, because I now in the EU travel on my British passport for reasons that are incredibly complicated. I haven't got my Polish nationality yet verified and returned to me, but my children have. But I can't let the children go through by themselves, particularly my youngest, and so I'm often let through on the EU queue, and then they have to do everything manually because it doesn't work with their systems in quite a few countries. So that's quite interesting. And in the Philippines, for instance, as well, you've got a super app for storing government-issued digital IDs, and that's now being integrated into different mobile ID management systems to make the national digital identity compliant with industry system architecture standards elsewhere. So, there are countries that are really, really, really pushing for this and making sure that not only it works in their country, but it works elsewhere too. So those citizens who are traveling and are, more global can use that in the best possible way.
Yeah, getting it all joined up. And just a final quick word from you then, Abigail, just about privacy. Are there any concerns in Namibia, or should there be concerns about privacy issues, or even, are there reassurances from the people involved in this programme that you're going to get all the benefits of this digital ID without people having their privacy compromised?
I think when it comes to anything digital, once you have a good solid product, you also have hackers, and you also have people that are willing to do fraud, and they're always going to be, well, not always going to be, but I feel like currently they are always a step ahead of what you're trying to create. So in terms of privacy, I've covered quite a few stories where data breaches are a big thing that, government are trying to solve. Them pushing e-government infrastructure to try and bypass that, or try and make sure that everybody's data has been secured. That is a thing. However, privacy will definitely be a thing that Namibia will have to 100% and be on top of. It's not going to be easy because it's, once data's out there, it's anyone's game if anyone wants to be able to hack it or use it in a malicious way. But yeah, privacy is definitely going to be an issue. Cyber threats are huge right now. I'm getting reports from not just African countries, globally, where there's been breaches, deep fakes. We're talking artificial intelligence, that people are using machine learning in a negative way, and therefore you're able to have a bunch of data and do with it as you please. But in future, I think if Namibia gets it right, then they will see the benefits of it.
Okay, great. Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much. That's Abigail Ruth Opiah, and she is with the Biometric Update news website. Well, she writes for that website, among many other things that you do, Abigail. I know you're very busy. Right, there we are. That's it for this edition. As you've been hearing, the producer and editor is Anya Litarovich. Our production manager is Liz Toohey. I'm Gareth. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. It's Michael Calore, Director of Consumer Tech and Culture at Wired, here with my colleagues, senior writer Lauren Good.
Hello.
And Wired contributor Zoe Schiffer.
Hey, everyone.
We're here to tell you about our new podcast, Uncanny Valley, a show about the people, power, and influence of Silicon Valley.
Every week, we get together to talk about how technology and culture from the Valley is influencing our everyday lives.
We dig into questions like, will we ever get our privacy back? Is OpenAI for real? And how are Silicon Valley billionaires impacting U.S. elections?
The first episode of Uncanny Valley comes out on October 31st. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.